So in the second half of this lecture, we're going to look at how neurotransmitters can influence our behavior. And specifically, we're going to look at this question, is there a biological basis for trust? Which is an interesting question because trust is a pretty complex behavior. So can we boil it down to something biological? Well, what is trust? Trust is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. And taken from the article we're going to look at, trust is indispensable in friendship, love, families, and organization, and plays a key role in economic exchange and politics. And clearly, trust is really important to social institutions and relationships. So when researchers first started asking this question, they looked at the hormone oxytocin, which is a neuropeptide, which is a chemical and also a hormone, synthesized in the hypothalamus and released from the posterior pituitary gland. Receptors for oxytocin are found in the central and peripheral nervous system, so in the brain and then also the peripheral nervous systems. And both males and females produce and release oxytocin. So oxytocin is well known to facilitate labor and is involved in milk production in humans and other mammals. But what led researchers to believe that it might play a role in trust is that they had done many studies that indicated that oxytocin facilitated pair bonds among different types of animals. So when animals had higher levels of oxytocin, they were more likely to actually pair bond and mate and then kind of cohabitate. So how can we measure trust? Well, researchers came up with something called the trust game. And in this game, what you have is participants are partnered up in pairs of two. One participant is the investor, and the other participant is the trustee. So, both the investor and the trustee are awarded 12 monetary units. And to increase the validity of the study, the monetary units could be cashed in for real money. The study was done in Switzerland, so each monetary unit was worth 0.4 Swiss francs. So, the investor has the choice of transferring 0, 4, 8, or 12 monetary units to the trustee. When the monetary units are transferred to the trustee, their value automatically triples. So what happens then is that the trustee will get the money from the investor, and that money will triple. So again, the investor and the trustee both start with 12 monetary units. So if the investor transfers 8 monetary units to the trustee will have 12 plus 8 times 3, which is 36. If the investor transfers 12, the trustee will have 12 that he or she was endowed with, plus the 12 transferred units that were now tripled. So the trustee will have 48. So what happens now is the trustee holds all the cards. He or she can choose to keep all the money and violate the investor's trust, or he or she can return a portion of the monetary units, and both the participants gain more money. So Kosfeld and colleagues in 2005 looked at this question in an experimental design, and they took 119 males with a mean age of 22 from Zurich, Switzerland, and each participant made 4 decisions in the same role. So the participant was assigned one role, and then they were paired with 4 different partners and made decisions 4 different times. So participants were randomly assigned to different groups. So there was the investors, and half of those participants received an oxytocin nasal spray, and half of the participants received a placebo spray. So the placebo spray doesn't actually do anything. So all of the participants received this nasal spray, half of which contained oxytocin and the other half of which was a placebo. It didn't actually have any effect. So there was investors and there were also trustees, and again, some of those participants received an oxytocin dosage which elevated their levels of oxytocin, and other participants received a placebo. And the question is, will investors who received oxytocin give more monetary units and hence be more trusting? And that's exactly what they found. So in the black bars here, we have the participants who received oxytocin, and in the white bars, you have the participants who received the placebo. So 45% of the participants who received oxytocin gave the maximal amount, whereas only 21% of participants who received the placebo gave the maximal amount. Conversely, 45% of participants who received placebo gave less than 8 monetary units, and only 21% of participants who received oxytocin gave less than 8. So overall, participants who received oxytocin's transfers were 17% higher. So they then asked the question, does oxytocin produce more prosocial behaviors in general, or is it specific to trust? So to look at that question, what they did is they looked at the trustees' back transfers to the investors. So once the trustees got the money, how much did they actually give back, and did oxytocin elevate that amount of money? As it turns out, it didn't. There was no statistically significant difference in the back transfer amounts between oxytocin and control groups.
So the conclusions from this study are that oxytocin does not increase the general inclination to behave prosocially as demonstrated by an equal amount of back transfers, but rather oxytocin specifically affects the trusting behavior of investors. So this is an interesting finding because what we're talking about is a single neurotransmitter, a single chemical influencing an individual's level of trust. And what we know from psychology is that with all things there's variability, with all things biological and psychological. So variability means differences, which means that, some people are tall and some people are short. Or, for example, some people might have more oxytocin and some people might have less oxytocin. And this leads me to ask the question, well, how much oxytocin do I have? Do I have relatively higher amounts or lower amounts? And is that potentially influencing my willingness to trust other individuals? So for a while, when this research first came out, psychology labored under the belief that potentially oxytocin might just indiscriminately lead people to trust others. And that could potentially be maladaptive because not everyone is actually worthy of trusting. Some people have bad intentions. So in 2010, a recent study came out to address that, and what they manipulated in this study was the reliability of the partner with whom you're actually investing your money. So they had a reliable partner and also an unreliable partner, and what they found was when they designated an individual to be unreliable by assigning certain types of attributes and characteristics to this person, people were much more likely, even with elevated levels of oxytocin, to give high amounts. So what this indicates is that oxytocin doesn't increase our ability to, or our willingness to, trust people indiscriminately. It only seems to affect people's levels of trust in others who are deemed to be reliable. So what about testosterone? Does testosterone increase our likelihood to trust an individual or decrease it? Well, recently, researchers found out that elevated levels of testosterone actually cause individuals who tend to be higher in trusting behavior to begin with to decrease their levels of trust in others. So what they did is they looked at females in this study and gave them a shot of testosterone. And females who were higher on trusting, when they had elevated levels of testosterone, actually showed less trusting behavior. So what are we talking about here? Well, what we're talking about with this lecture is biological psychology, and we're talking about the biological basis of psychological processes, behavior, and learning. And what we just learned from this lecture is that by raising the levels of certain types of chemicals, certain types of neurotransmitters, namely oxytocin, people might be more likely to be trusting of others. So this is a direct example of how your biology can influence your behavior. But again, it's not just that simple. We can't just say, oh, it's just oxytocin, because your biology, your genes, are always interacting with other sources of input as well, including the environment and also your individual choices. So, for example, let's say that I have the biology to have high levels of oxytocin, and I'm biologically inclined to be more trusting. But let's say that I'm in a romantic relationship and my partner cheats on me. So that would be the environment. So that may cause me to be less trusting because I got cheated on. So then for a while, maybe I go on to be less trusting, but then perhaps upon reflection, I realize that being so untrusting of individuals is actually detrimental. And so then I can reflect on this and make an individual choice to be a little bit more trusting. So you can see how all three of these sources influence behavior.